Good morning, everybody. My name is Andrea Dierlein. I'm an assistant professor in public health nutrition at the School of Global Public Health. And this morning we have an extremely exciting event about food sustainability and public health, the cost of a plate of food in 2020. And so I would love to introduce our guest, Shaza Moghraby. She's the Communications and Advocacy Lead of the UN World Food Program in New York. And I will let her, introduce herself and start the event.
Thank you, Andrea. And it's such a pleasure to be here and talk to NYU students. As Andrea said, I'm the Communications and Advocacy Lead in the World Food Program's New York office. I've been in this position for 3 years right now, since 2017. And prior to that, I worked in our Jordan country office for 3.5 years as well. I joined the World Food Program in 2014. It was at the peak of the Syrian refugee crisis in Jordan, and witnessed and saw the evolution of food assistance from hot meals to food boxes to the kind of form of assistance that we are providing there right now, and in many countries, which is through cash assistance and digital forms of aid. So it's a real pleasure to talk to NYU students, especially for our next generation of the people who are going to shape, hopefully, our food ecosystem, our nutrition systems, which unfortunately now are very broken and unhealthy. And we really, really need this new generation to really start looking at all the deficiencies so that we can come up with something that's much more healthier and sustainable. I'm going to start with just explaining what the World Food Program. I'm sure some of you I've met before, and you know me, but for those who I've not spoken to before, I've never briefed, I'm going to just start with giving you a brief introduction on who we are, what we do, and why we do it. So the World Food Program is the largest humanitarian organization in the world. This was certified in 2002 by Guinness World Book of Records. And we have around 20,000 staff stationed in over 80 countries around the world, and around 6 regional bureaus in Asia, 3 in Africa, in the Middle East, in Latin America, and also some liaison offices in Europe and North America. Our work mainly focuses on countries that are in the developing world, countries, whether it's middle income countries through our support for the governments there, or some countries that are really sort of impacted by factors such as conflict, climate change, natural disasters, and are in dire need of support and help from organizations like the World Food Program. We are mostly known as the agency that are the first responders and the first boots on the ground when disaster strikes. So whenever there's a natural disaster or conflict, WFP is the first responder providing assistance, not just food assistance, but humanitarian assistance on behalf of the United Nations, as well as the NGOs and humanitarian community. One fact that maybe not a lot of people know is that we are the logistics arm of the United Nations. So at any given day, we have 5,000 trucks, 20 ships, and 70 planes flying humanitarian aid workers, as well as humanitarian assistance to hard to reach areas. Whenever there is a crisis or a conflict, I'm just gonna, go to the next slide. Whenever there is a crisis or a conflict, the humanitarian network and agencies, they divide up into what we call clusters. And each cluster is in charge of a specific aspect. So for example, UNICEF is in charge of children, water sanitation. So any plans around, how are we going to make sure that the children have shelter, have proper access to water sanitation, education when crisis hits. UNICEF forms a cluster and takes the lead on that with, of course, other actors. For WFP, we usually are in charge of two clusters. Number one is the logistics. So we are in charge of coming up with a plan to provide aid to affected communities. You'll see in the photo, for example, one example of that is airdrops. So this is a solution that we resort to when we are looking at communities that are besieged by war. We have done that in South Sudan, for example, where we couldn't physically reach and get people into some of the areas, some of the affected areas. So what we do is we got a WFP plane. We run the UN Humanitarian Air Services. And it's a very fascinating and explicit process of just packaging, this aid and making sure that it's well packed so that when it's dropped from miles above the sky, it falls intact. And we resort to technologies, obviously, to see that the areas that we're going to be dropping this aid is vacant, and that we have partners on the ground in the affected communities in the areas that can get the aid, unpack it, and take it to the communities that are affected. So we've done that in South Sudan. We've done that in Syria as well, in a city called Deir ez-Zor. So we're in charge of finding what is the best plan, the logistics plan to get humanitarian aid to these affected population. We are also co-leads in the food security cluster. So assessing what are the food security needs on the ground. Are we nearing famine? How bad the situation is? We, along with FAO, co-lead the food security cluster. And another cluster that we also lead is the telecommunications and the ICT technology cluster. So that makes sure that there is constant communication between the various actors who are working on this crisis. That is, of course, what we call the humanitarian aspect of our work. We also have another mandate, which is more the longer term and development agenda that we work on. And this is whether it's in crisis areas where we work on a longer term plan to make sure that those communities that are affected can be self-sufficient and resilient once we leave. So for example, let's say a population or an area were affected by an earthquake that has cut off, all roads and the necessary infrastructure for food to be transported to that area. We set up food distribution sites. First of all, we go into emergency mode and we provide, whether it's food boxes or hot meals, depending on the context. And then at the same time, we launch projects to rehabilitate the infrastructures that were damaged by the earthquakes, so that we make sure that when in a few months' time we finish our work, we make sure that the infrastructures are there so that we are able to transport and procure food from neighboring areas and cities and bring them to those affected communities and not have them, cut off. So this is what we call the humanitarian kind of life saving aspect is called what we call saving lives, but the changing lives is all about our development and working with governments to build the resilience of communities that have been affected, whether it's by conflict or climate change. We are also experts in providing social protection systems. We also work with governments on food systems, looking at, what is the eco-food system in these countries and whether there are deficiencies that we need to work on, because that particular topic, which you'll probably hear a lot about in the coming year, is really a major issue. We as agencies that work on food security, whether it's the World Food Programme, the Food and Agricultural Organization, other NGOs, IFAD, the International Fund for Agricultural Development, we have been moving from looking at a specific angle like hunger or food security to really more the ecosystem of food systems. Why is it that we are witnessing gross amount of food loss and food waste in countries such as the US and in Europe, whereas we have the hunger rates rising steadily for the past 4 years, even though at some point we thought that famine was history, doesn't belong into the 21st century. Now we are edging towards famine in many areas around the world. So it doesn't make sense that the world is producing enough food to feed everyone, but at the same time, we have people dying of starvation and hunger in some countries. So to address this issue, we need to look at it from a holistic point of view. What are our supply chains from production to table? Uh, are there gaps that are causing the food losses? What can we do to avert that? How can we transform, the gross amount of food waste that happens in countries such as the US into countries, transform it or transport it to countries that are suffering from severe levels of food insecurity and hunger. So it's a very complex system, but it's very critical. And it's very critical for the world and the international community to achieve the 2030 agenda set out in 2015. We've got 192 or 193 countries signing this blueprint called the Sustainable Development Goals, a set of 17 goals that really aims to take the international community and shift it into a much better place in terms of sustainability and providing access to everyone, whether it's education, whether it's food security, whether it's good nutrition. It's all interconnected. So looking at things in a comprehensive view is very key for us to move forward and achieve the 2030 agenda. So as I was mentioning, things were looking quite bad as of last year, 2019. We were seeing a continuous and upward trend of hunger rates and food insecurity issues. The main key drivers for those were conflict and climate change, but by far number one was conflict. And a lot of our work focused on doing research to link between conflict, how conflict is breeding food insecurity and hunger around the world, and also vice versa. When you have food insecurity pockets around the world, this is a lightning rod for instability. When you see these protests of people just, holding a piece of bread because they're saying we can't even afford that anymore. In my experience, one of the major factors, even before we did any studies about this link, some of the people that I used to interview, because that was part of my job, they were saying we didn't leave because of the shelling. It was because we ended up spending an entire 6 months on nothing but a loaf of bread for the entire family and tea. That is all what we had for 6 entire months. And the kids were getting sick. We were getting sick. So we ended up having to go to countries like Jordan, like Lebanon, where we can get food assistance from agencies like the World Food Program and Be Safe. So that kind of research really led us to doing some studies and research. So as I was saying, we did a lot of research, and one of the research that some of you might be very familiar with is called Cost of a Plate of Food. And this is one of the studies that we wanted to use as a tool to advocate and shed light on the link between hunger and conflict. And what we try to do with this is we calculate the percentage of how much a New Yorker would pay for a simple plate of food that consists of rice and beans, and then calculate the share of that to their average income, their average daily income. And we found out that what would typically cost $1.50 for a simple plate of rice and beans in New York would cost hundreds and hundreds of dollars in countries that are affected in such as South Sudan, in Syria, in Yemen. And relatively speaking, what that means is that people will have to work for 2 to 3 days to afford a very simple plate of food in these countries. This study, we've been launching it and updating it for 3 years. And you have a list and index of countries that we classify as the most expensive plate of food are in those countries. And for 3 consecutive years, it's been South Sudan as the country where conflict has had the biggest impact on hunger rates. This year is no different, and we're trying to work our best and advocate to end the conflict there. But unfortunately, it's having a really massive, massive cost on the livelihood of the people, the South Sudanese people. So it's very important that this really stops. And after that study, we wanted to lobby and more on a political level. So we started advocating for a Security Council resolution that, first of all, acknowledges the link between hunger and conflict, and that vicious cycle of hunger also breeding conflict or contributing is one of the contributing factors for conflict, and also condemning the use of food as a weapon in war, which we see happen all the time. So in 2018, on the 24th of May, we managed to, secure unanimous agreement on Security Council 2417 that acknowledges that link. This was a landmark resolution for us, and we continue to this very day. We want to try to use this in especially some of the crises that we work in. To shed light on this issue and really condemn the use of food as a weapon in war. One second, let me just. So, as I was saying, things were looking bad. We are having a proliferation of crises and conflicts around the world. Even now we're we already know about Yemen, Syria. We've got crises that don't really make it in the headlines. So we hear a lot about Yemen and Syria, but you don't really hear about Burkina Faso, which really is one of the most concerning spots of food insecurity. You've got thousands and millions of people relying 100% on WFP support. That means that without it, they're literally steps away from starvation. So we're having this crisis already, and then in 2020 comes, pandemic hits. So instantly we realize that this means big, big trouble, especially for those living in the most remote areas. We're seeing airlines being shut, countries locking down, not allowing anyone any movement in and out of their countries. So what does that mean to people who are relying 100% on not just WFP's assistance, but also the United Nations and the humanitarian community's assistance? There's no way these people can afford to go days without that kind of assistance. So as the logistics arm for the UN, we immediately ended up setting up this global hubs and spokes system. So global humanitarian hubs in all continents. We had a couple in Asia, we had in Europe, the Middle East, Latin America, everywhere around the world. And these hubs basically hosted warehouses where we had the necessary equipment that the humanitarian community needed to transport to the hard to reach areas. We also set up air bridges as well between those hubs, between like hubs, for example, Liège in Belgium, to Malaysia, to Dubai, to transport humanitarian responders and humanitarian workers to the places that they needed to be. We were able to transport thousands, to over almost, I think, 25,000 humanitarian aid workers from hundreds and hundreds of agencies, and we still continue this service. At some point, we were the largest air service in the world. But of course, now that countries have been opening up their commercial lines, we've been relying on that as well as the services that we were providing. All right, so these are the photos. This is basically the humanitarian hubs that I was talking about. And this is all, you know, the warehouse with all the equipment that the humanitarian agencies wanted to transport to countries. This is the WFP run UN humanitarian air service. This is the one in, I think, China. Wherever possible in this photo, if you can see, we're trying to also digitize our assistance. I mentioned this briefly at the beginning of my talk that, you know, since 2014, WFP has really, it underwent an evolution and transformation in the way that we provide assistance from what we call food aid, which is in kind and consists of whether it's hot meals or food boxes, into more digital forms of assistance. And the reason why we always try to implement the digital form of assistance is because it reaps benefits not just to the community that is affected, but also to the host communities. So, for example, Jordan, the country that I was working in, when we were dealing with the Syrian refugee crisis, Jordan is a middle-income country, so it cannot really afford to provide any form of financial assistance to the refugees. It can give facilitation for organizations such as WFP to do so, but through cash assistance and programs like that, refugees were able to go to regular supermarkets and get the food that they need. This is a very dignified form of, you know, getting your assistance, and at the same time, families are able to boost their nutrition and buy what really suits their family. So you give them their kind of the control and the power to choose whatever food they would like to eat, and at the same time, that money gets injected into local businesses and local supermarkets. So we were able to inject millions of dollars into local economies using that kind of assistance. So yeah, just in terms of the statistics of what we're anticipating for next year. So last year in 2019, the number of the number of people who are suffering from acute food insecurity was calculated at 135 million people. Last year, we were able to reach 100 million people. This year, according to our research and studies and the data that we've received, we're anticipating that that number is going to rise by 80% to 270 million people. And this is why in May, we launched our largest ever operation to reach 134 million people, and we might even scale up. We've never reached that amount of people. We've already reached almost 100 million as of now, and hoping to really scale up rapidly within the next couple of months. To do that, we need urgent funds, and we also need access to the areas that are hard to reach, because these are where the most vulnerable people are living. They're the ones who are in dire need of our support and our assistance, and they're the ones who could be left behind. So it's a huge challenge, but hopefully with the right funds and the access, we can avert a humanitarian catastrophe. The last thing that I wanted to mention, is the recent announcement of the Nobel Peace Prize for the World Food Programme, which was a huge, huge honor on the 9th of October. WFP was awarded the prize for its efforts in combating hunger and also contributing to creating more peaceful environments through through our assistance, and also for our advocacy and work with regards to establishing that link between conflict and hunger, and advocating towards the Security Council resolution, as well as other research that we have done. It's a great honor, and I would love to invite you all to join us in marking this moment and celebrating it through this Facebook Live event that we will be hosting this Thursday. It's going to be at 7 a.m. New York time, 1 p.m. European time. And it's going to be a celebration by our staff, by some of the people that have received our support, by our partners who made it possible for us to win this prize. And it would really be great if you guys can join us. I will share the link in the chat box, or with Chris or Niati once the session is over. But I think that's it in a nutshell. I think I went on for quite some time, so happy to take any questions you have right now.
Okay, so we do have two questions. So one is, when it comes to nutrition, what role does health communications play? And what are some of the key objectives that health communicators focus on when it comes to food, nutrition, and food sustainability?
Yeah. Of course, I mean, that's a very, very good question. I think nutrition and communication should really go hand to hand. From our experience in the field, it's really important that we raise awareness in the communities that we work in on the importance of child nutrition, for example, the first 1,000 days, mother nutrition as well. A lot of our problems in the world when it comes to nutrition is like, it's unfortunate because it's unnecessary. We have countries where there are high stunting records because children are not getting the nutrition they need to grow. Mothers are not being, they're not getting the nutrition they need to provide, to breastfeed their children, or provide the necessary education around nutrition about children. So it really goes hand in hand. It's very important to make sure that the community is on board. It's very important to also work with the resources that you have in different areas. And that is something that, cooperation between the different stakeholders and sectors is key, because, health actors, as well as humanitarian actors and nutrition actors, when they come together, as well as communications, can make a really, really big difference in how, we can provide an effective response in some of the countries and areas that we work in.
Okay, great. And then another one is, how can we reduce the food cost while keeping the food quality?
That's also a very good question. And I think the answer is, we really need to start doing a lot of advocacy around, some of the advertising that we are witnessing, and just really approach this in a more holistic way. I think the Food System Summit that I mentioned, that's happening in the spring of next year, is going to be looking at exactly that issue, that particular issue. It does not make sense that that the low quality food is actually the least expensive kind of food. On our part as WFP, we try to make sure that our food and interventions are very nutritious. One program that comes to mind is School Meals Program. We're the largest provider of school meals program around the world, and we provide it in over 60 countries. So one thing that we've noticed is that in some areas where children go to school, they end up, their family provide them some pocket money for lunch, and they end up spending that on crisps or chocolate, because that's actually the cheapest thing that they can afford. It gives them like a temporary boost, and then they can focus for an hour or two in class. But what we try to do with these school meals program is to provide that if the kids are going to have this one meal during the day, then it has to be a healthy one, a nutritious one. So we provide them with snacks that includes fruits and vegetables, some fortified date bars, for example, or biscuits that can give them the right energy and nutrition for them to be focused throughout the day. So we are trying to work with governments to change policies as well, like not just WFP, but other, the food agencies to raise awareness, and that's where communication plays a big role. And also try to influence the policies that regulate food prices so that we can have, fruits and vegetables at a reasonably affordable price that can allow people that, it cannot be out of reach to people who are vulnerable. Uh, it's just morally unacceptable for people not to be able to afford these kind of diets because they don't have enough food. Yet they can afford the crisps and the chocolates and the food that are not healthy and very harmful. Um, so yeah, we're working on it. But like I said, we really need, I'm hoping that with this food system summit, it will shed light on all these deficiencies that we have in our food ecosystem that is making it very, very hard for people to afford something nutritious.
Are there any other questions? In terms of the for like maternal health, so are there programs that try to get more, preconceptional? So trying to increase, targeting more of like adolescence phases that would be, maybe before they become moms or before they enter pregnancy or potentially get pregnant?
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is something that I know that we have a program with UNICEF on that particular, age group, the adolescents, especially since, uh, in many contexts, we try to obviously, wherever we are, we try to encourage equal access to education. And the school meals program, by the way, is a big contributor for that. But we do see in many cases, adolescent girls, particularly, they're the most impacted, who are in charge of the nutrition of the house. So it's the mothers, and then it's the sister, if it's a family of boys, you have the sister who's in charge of helping the mom with preparing the food. So it's important that we target those, girls. And at the same time, what we also try to do is encourage parents to enroll these girls in school by providing these free meals and also lucrative packages to parents to enroll the kids. And what we've seen out of experience is that when we do that, sometimes, as in all families, the girls are more interested in studying and are more studious and are performing better than the boys, right? Because, they enjoy doing it. So it was, to me, like from my experience, it was very uplifting to see the change in mentality. Whereas when girls are seen as like their role is in the home and preparing the food for the family and helping the mothers, that when they're performing well in school, they start looking at the girl as like, well, maybe we can focus on her. That if she can get a scholarship, she can go to university, she can help the family rise above poverty instead of focusing on the guy. So like these programs, just raising awareness is really, really critical and important. And I know that we're hoping to expand them more, particularly in that age group. I think it's very critical that they're targeted.
Yeah, yeah. We have one more question here. To what extent does this organizational work, or does this organization work with local food producers to nourish the community, if at
Yeah.
all?
Great. Yes, we do a lot of work with smallholder farmers, for example, because, uh, they, especially those living in areas that are affected by climate change. So we work with them on programs that allows them to predict, harsh climate extremes and weather forecast, for example, so that they could grow their crops at a specific time of the year where it's less likely that their harvest will be affected by climate change. Also, a lot of their produce goes into school meals, for example. The fruits and vegetables that go into our school lunches and school meals come from farmers within the community. The people who prepare the school lunches are usually women. I mean, it could be men and women, but also like women within those communities who we are hoping to provide some job skills so that they are able to enter the labor force and really work and earn for themselves and provide for their families. It's very important for us to work and procure food for sustainability also from local producers. There are areas where are affected by desertification. So we do resort to innovative and technological solution where we can, have these communities grow gardens and vegetables and produce in the middle of the deserts using hydroponics, for example. And we've seen that program really succeed in multiple countries. So yeah, very much work with the local producers. I just wanted to mention something about the cost of a plate of food study, because there's a history of that with NYU, especially the Nutrition Without Borders Club. When we launched that study in 2017, it was at the UN General Assembly in September. And it really garnered a lot of attention. And we wanted to really bring it somewhere else. We didn't want to just say, okay, here's the exhibition, here's the study, over. So that was when I met Niati in 2017, and I mentioned this study, and she was really, really nice she was obviously very interested, and we worked together on this panel discussion and an exhibition at NYU in the Public Health division. And it was really such an amazing session, very, very informative. We had our nutritionist joined the panel, as well as I think a couple of WFP representatives. I was there as well, and from that, the Nutrition Without Borders was created, the Nutrition Without Borders Club. So some nice piece of history. I really hope that we can continue our work with NWB. They've been doing fantastic work, uh, especially around some of the campaigns that we've been doing around food waste. Really, really amazing stuff a couple of years ago, where we had them challenging other clubs. So it's really, really great. And I just want to say thank you so much for all your work and support to WFP, and also to, the whole issue of public health and nutrition and food systems as well. It's much appreciated. We're counting on you guys to take the torch and hopefully work on these systems and help shaping a more healthier and sustainable food system for everyone.
Yeah, so I guess along with somebody just wrote in saying, do you have a call to action for us to help support your work? So
yes, thank you so much. Absolutely. I think, I would definitely tune into the Food System Summit. I'm happy to share some links for you guys. Have a look at it, see what you can help in also spreading the word. For us with WFP as well, any posts that you can put on your social media accounts to raise awareness, whether it's on our food waste campaigns or our work in several countries, is much appreciated. We have various ways also for donation, if you can raise awareness on that. One of the most popular ways of donating is an app called Share the Meal. It's an app that you can download, and it hosts a couple of campaigns that we're working on. You can choose the campaign that you want to donate to, and with as little as $1, you can feed families in countries such as Yemen, Syria, DRC, Sudan. So really appreciate your support and spreading the word about, ways to donate, and also on your social media channels.
Okay. Any other questions? I have a good question just about how you got involved in this work, because I know a lot of students, coming out of this program, I think have, some ideals of wanting to maybe work for, WFP or
Yeah.
UN or wherever. And so I was wondering if maybe you could just comment on how you got into this, or, whatever you think might be applicable to kind of to these students that are, probably listening. I mean, I think the students that are listening in clearly are very interested in this type of work. So
Yeah, no, I'd love to. So, for me, like when I joined the World Food Program in 2014, it was my first experience actually working in the humanitarian sector and the United Nations. But I've always wanted to work with the United Nations. It's been like a lifelong dream. So, before that, I was working. So, I'm Jordanian from Jordan, and I was working for like 7 years in communications. My last job before joining the World Food Program was at the Royal Hashemite Court, His Majesty King Abdullah's communications department, and I was working as a communications analyst. And in 2011, 2012, we were, being faced with the Syrian refugee crisis. I remember very well in 2012 when we heard that a refugee camp was going to be set up in this village that I never heard of in Jordan called Zatari. It was like, wow, this is big, this is real. For some reason, we thought that the Syrian civil war, just like other countries who were impacted by the Arab Spring, that it will go on, it'll be over. But then we started hearing about we need to start opening a refugee camp, and for let the humanitarian organizations do their work. Um, so I started focusing on that file, on the Syria file. In the meantime, I started seeing a lot of openings and positions for UN organizations that I didn't know had work in Jordan before. There was just a few organizations that were more visible, but now every single humanitarian NGO or UN agency that you've heard of are now opening offices in Jordan and Lebanon to deal with the Syrian refugee crisis. So I thought this was an opportunity for me to pursue this, lifelong dream to work with the United Nations. And I came across this opening for, head of communications and spokesperson for the UN World Food Program that will focus on the Syria crisis. And I applied for it. And a few months later, I was shortlisted, and I was really excited to know that I've been accepted and was offered an opportunity. And just since then, it has been such, I really have to say, a life-changing experience for me. Just really, especially since it is, full-fledged operation. The fact that getting there and having the privilege to meet those people that you hear about in the newspapers and really getting to know them, and them opening their homes to you and sharing, it really was life-changing for me. And it's just so rewarding, not because of the support that they're getting, but just, like, really their resilience is so inspirational. It really, you go back and you reflect back on how resilient they are, and you really get a lot of inspiration from that. It's really humbling, and it's good to know that you're making some kind of a difference in their lives. You're making it better, a little bit more bearable, until it's safe for them to go back home. So I think, a career in the World Food Program, I cannot recommend it enough. I've been here, for like, 6 years. Even on the New York level, it's really such a privilege, such an amazing opportunity. The fact that we're present in like over 80 countries can really expose you to a lot of opportunities to go there, see for yourself what the problem is on the ground. And that's really, really important. it's very important. Like one thing I would also like to ask for this group is really to go seek the truth, look at the reality there, make sure that you do the linkages, because we are living in an interconnected world. I know that the COVID-19 pandemic, people might think we need to focus on us, and we've seen uh, areas and spaces and countries that we never had to worry about, cities. Our focus was always on the rural areas. Now we're providing assistance in cities to people who have been unemployed for months. We're seeing countries such as the US and Europe and Germany suffering. But one thing we need to know is that even so, we cannot ignore those people who are really, really on the brink of hunger and starvation. Because as we've seen in COVID, all that will go back to us. It's just the whole situation is interconnected. This can lead to another conflict that the world certainly does not need. So invest now, especially in the food security, insecurity pockets around the world. And this way, the international community can spare millions and millions of dollars if like this crisis would evolve into a full-fledged one. So yeah, I think I'd like to kind of just send that message and just really start thinking about like how everything is interconnected in this world, even our food systems, the hunger issue, the food loss versus the food waste. It's all linked.
Well, thank you. This has been amazing. I learned a lot. This is totally outside of any work that I do, so it's really great for me, and I'm sure all of the participants enjoyed it as well. So if there's no last thoughts.
I see something from Erica. Any internship opportunities?
Oh, okay.
Yes, we always have internship opportunities. These are all posted on our WFP Careers website. So if you go to the website itself, there's a segment called Careers, and we also have a Twitter page, a Twitter account on WFP Careers. So there's always a need for that, always a need for volunteers and also internships. And it's a great way for you to really see for yourself what are the needs on the ground. So yeah, we have a very robust internship program.
I guess that's it. But thank you so much. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye. Thanks
Bye.
everyone for joining.